And that verse right there, when it says, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, okay? Why does Paul say you need that? Why does Paul put those verses there? Well, you go up to verse 12. Look what he says first. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, to acknowledge those who work hard among you, who care for you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Hold them in the highest regard in love because of their work. So what Paul is saying in that verse, he is saying whoever pours into your life, whoever is helping you to become more Christ-like, whoever is bringing you closer to God, Paul is saying, be incredibly thankful for that person. And for some of you, you have youth leaders, and they meet with you one-on-one. Others of you, they meet with you in a group. Sometimes you might have a coach, or it might be your parents, or it might be someone a little bit older. Whoever that person is who's pouring into you, Paul is saying, be incredibly thankful for that person. I remember all the mentors I've had in my life, and they all had different personalities, but I see how each one of them, they shaped me and they influenced me to do what I'm doing right now. And when the days of ministry, when they're really hard, I'm incredibly thankful for those men who took time just to hang out with me. And why do you need to be thankful for them? Because what Paul calls you to do in life, because Paul says this, to be a Christian, it means to be a blessing to other people. In a sense, Paul is saying to be a Christian, it means you are a good friend, because look what Paul says right here in verse 14. Actually, in verse 13, live in peace with each other, and we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. What Paul is saying here, if you see your friend and you see them in sin, are you good enough a friend to call them out? Or do you just let them go and you don't care where they end up? Paul is saying, no, if you see your friend, if you see another Christian, if you see your brother or sister heading into sin, or you see something in their life, the most loving thing you can do is pointed out for them. And then he goes on, he says this, encourage the disheartened, that if you see someone sad, be an encouragement to them, that if you see someone heartbroken, just don't leave them alone in the corner, but go to them and throw your arms around them and help them. And then he goes on and he says, help the weak, be patient with everyone, and make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. That Paul is saying, you need to look out for the people in this room. That when it comes to the people at your church, when it comes to the people you go to school with, that Paul says on some level you are there to help them. That when the garden Genesis, when Cain killed Abel, and God asked Cain, hey, where is your brother? And Cain said this back to God. He said, am I my brother's keeper? Am I responsible for my brother? And he was thinking no. And God saying, no, you really are. That you should be looking out for him. And if you do that, it becomes incredibly draining. That if you do the Christian life the way it's meant to be done, it becomes an incredibly draining thing. That I had one mentor, he took me to Chick-fil-A, and we were talking one day, and he told me this. He said, are you sure you want to be a pastor? Are you sure you really want to do this? Because he said this, a pastor's heart is one of the saddest places there could be. Because not only do you take your life and you deal with your own struggles, but you're meant to care for other people. And he said, Daryl, do you really want that? It's just not pastors. It's Christians. Do you really want to follow Jesus? Do you really want the Christian life? Because if you do, and you do it well, and you have to call out your friends when you see them in sin, and they get mad with you. The days when your heart's hurting, and instead of just doing your own heart, you go out there to look for others, it becomes incredibly draining. And Paul says the way to avoid that is by three things. Rejoice always. That find joy in what you're doing. Find joy in helping others. And then he says, pray continually. That just don't start off your day and do a 5-minute prayer and then never talk to God again. He says, pray continually. That find a way to stay close to God in your life. And then maybe the most important thing, he says, be thankful. Be a person who has thankfulness in your heart. Because if you don't have thankfulness, what happens? Do not quench the Spirit. And that whole idea of quenching the Spirit, it means this, that you cut off God from working in your life. That a lack of thankfulness in your heart, it cuts you off from God. So the gospel truth tonight is why thankfulness is so important in your life. And what did that look like in Abraham's life? So Genesis chapter 21, last week we talked about how Abraham screwed up royally and how he was a really bad guy and how God had every right to judge him, but yet God simply said, Abraham, I want you to walk with me. Abraham, I simply want to bless you. And then later on, God says, Abraham, I'm going to give you your kid. And Genesis chapter 21 is God keeping his promise to Abraham. And what does that look like? Verse 1. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. And if you don't know what that is, I am not going to explain it to you. Ask your parents. Don't ask them that question. Never. I'm moving on. Okay. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. That the name Isaac means laughter. So to enjoy that, here's this.
Welcome back to our coverage of the game of the year between Yale and North Carolina.
If you're just joining us, we have witnessed an unbelievably well-fought match tonight, and it's come down to penalty kicks. Peterson for Yale, taking the first approach.
Spectacular! North Carolina's goal kick Richards just let one in past him now. So now the burden rests on Yale's Scott Sterling.
Here he comes, nerves of steel, that man, dealing with more pressure now than a submarine.
Indeed.
Home crowd showing some appreciation.
Johnson places the ball on the spot, getting ready. That man literally has a cannon for a leg.
Yes, he does.
Here he goes, winding up for the shot, and oh! The cannon has fired and hit Sterling directly to the face.
We clocked that at a stunning 116 kilometers per hour.
Now that's a lot of miles per hour.
Little chance that man's nose is not broken right now.
Oh, indeed. Now Sterling getting checked out for that one. Spectacular save, though, but sadly, he's not out of the woods yet.
On his feet now, a bit shaken.
But not stirred.
This crowd absolutely loves this man.
And Sterling's teammates welcome him back, a hero for now.
Yale's up again for the second attempt, looking to make it 2-0.
He approaches the ball with some determination. Here he goes. Oh!
It's high and wide, way off target.
Yes, apparently he thought he was kicking a field goal.
Wrong kind of football, I'd say.
Good show.
Back now to Scott Sterling. He looks a bit worse for wear, but ready for round 2.
And Shaw takes a moment. Here he goes with the approach. Oh!
Sterling with the fantastic dive. The ball flies straight through his hands and once again strikes him straight in the schnoz.
And let's see it again on the old instant replay. Oh, every excruciating detail captured in HD. Tennessee perfection.
Clocked at 129 kilometers per hour. Sterling does not look well.
2 wonderful saves and 2 definite concussions.
They may replace him at this point. He's done all he can.
Yes, as his trainer takes him off the field like a mustached lion dragging a gazelle through the Serengeti.
Adieu, Scott Sterling.
Adieu.
Yale now with their third PK. Richards is in the goal, bouncing like an infant girl.
The crowd holds their breath as he goes in. Here it comes. Oh! Very anticlimactic.
Let's see who they got to replace Scott
Sterling is back!
He's still in the game!
Oh my! And he's taking a very odd tactic now.
Seems to be curling up to protect his face.
Not exactly a recommended technique, but here it goes. Wait, no, Lampert needs to tie his shoe. Oh, and that's why you do a double knot, kids.
Sterling still waiting for the kick to happen. He's probably wondering when. Oh! Sweet butter crumpet! The ball drills Sterling right in the face.
That man's nose must be absolutely devastated. He's gonna look like a witch that blew her broom into her nose and then crashed into a hammer.
I hardly even care about this attempt. Let's go back to Scott Sterling,
the man,
the myth, the legend.
3 perfect blocks by Sterling and his cat-like face reflexes.
Absolutely incredible. Though I must say, Sterling does not look well at all.
Well, you know football players like to add a bit of drama, don't they?
They're gonna take him out. No, wait! They brought him a chair!
Oh, a bold move by the manager. Bain sets up for the 4th attempt.
And this, frankly, is a gimme. He literally just has to kick it anywhere except where Sterling is sitting.
There is no possible way that North Carolina can mess up this shot. Oh! 158 kilometers per hour!
This man can do no wrong!
Look at him beg for mercy when it's mercy that should be begging for him!
He has looked death in the eye and said, take your best shot! To which Death replies by punching him in the face over and over and over again.
If Yale makes this final shot, it's all over. But no! Oh, he misses, which means we're going to Scott Sterling!
His face is like a brick wall!
A brick wall that can feel pain and cries a lot.
But where's Sterling? Oh, he seems to be crawling away from the goal. What is he doing?
He's throwing away the bat! Oh! Sterling has done the impossible!
I can't believe it! Look at that! He played it just right! What incredible instincts to crawl away from the goal like that!
And his teammates rush the field, happy as a lark as they slide in.
A Bernini sculpture of a finish!
As his teammates carry him off on the stretcher of glory, we thank you for sharing this absolutely heart-stopping finish.
Scott Sterling and his face of steel have won it all.
So, bringing that all back, the name Isaac literally means laughter. It means to laugh. And you look at these verses here, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And the type of laughter that Sarah is talking about is not the type of laughter we just did, which is also good and from God, but the type of laughter that Sarah is talking about is a laughter that comes from thankfulness. And what that means, it means this, that this idea, when you're in a situation and it's really bad and it finally goes well for you, and sometimes you just give a laugh out of relief, and sometimes your friends just laugh with you out of happiness. So the type of laughter that they're doing right here is a laughter out of thankfulness, out of what God has done for them. And for many of you, there is no cliffhangers with this story. You know eventually we're going to talk about Abraham and how he had to sacrifice Isaac back to God. And for Abraham to be able and willing to do that, he would have to remember thankfulness and all the things that God has done for him to trust, for him to be able to trust God to do that. So my point I want to bring out of this is this. Thankfulness prepares you for whatever trouble you will face in life. Thankfulness prepares you for whatever trouble you will face in life. That the book of Philippians, and many of you know that Paul wrote Philippians, and he wrote this while he was in jail. And while Paul was in jail, he had this guy named Epaphroditus. And Epaphroditus was sent to him from the church in Philippi to help Paul out and give Paul the things that he needed. So picking up from there, verse 25, Paul says this about Epaphroditus. But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. So Epaphroditus got sick, and he was sick to the point of death. And the people of Philippi heard about that, and they were really concerned about him. But he got better, and this is what Paul says. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. And that whole idea that Paul said, I was spared sorrow upon sorrow, that if Epaphroditus had died, now he would have been more depressed than what he was already. That I'm sure, I never heard about this about Paul, because every time I hear about Paul, he's like the Christian superhero, that he's always upbeat, he's always serving God, that he's always happy, that he's always has joy. But when I look at that verse right here, Paul was sad. Paul was genuinely sad because he was stuck in a Roman prison, that what Paul wanted to do, he wanted to go to Spain, and he wanted to minister to as many people as he could. He wanted to share the gospel around the world, and now he's stuck in a Roman prison. And not only that, if you read other letters of Paul, he says this, not only am I sad because of this, but I am sad because I carry all the weight of all the churches in my heart. That Paul wasn't just concerned with his own persecution, he was concerned with all the Christians who could face persecution after him. That if you remember that verse we talked about in the very beginning, being a Christian can be incredibly draining. And if you're not careful, it can make your heart one of the saddest places there could be. And Paul is really battling that. Sorrow upon sorrow, that I think maybe this whole idea, I'm sure Paul didn't expect to end up in jail. That wasn't part of his plan. That when Paul started out, he was studying under this famous person, under this famous rabbi, and he probably thought he was going to be this great religious leader. And then he meets Jesus, and he decides to follow Jesus. And where does that end up for him? He ends up in jail. That I think many people who are Christians and you struggle with God, I don't think it's because you don't want to follow God. I don't think it's because you're out against God. I don't think it's because you really don't want to follow him. I think what happens to most people, they get hurt. That something happened in their life that they didn't expect. And they feel like God has let them down. So they're really struggling with sorrowness in their heart. And because they're struggling with sorrowness in their heart, they don't know where to go. And maybe that's you tonight. Maybe this past year, you really were on fire for God, and this was going to be a different year, and then something happened that caused you to be hurt. And you don't know where to go. And how did Paul battle this? The same book, chapter 4, Paul says this, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus. That some of you just need to hear this tonight. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to not be okay. But you don't live there. That it's okay for you to feel all those things, but how are you going to help yourself get out of it? Paul said, the way for me to deal with my sorrow, my sadness, my depression is thankfulness. Finding a way to be thankful to God. And how did Paul do that? He reminded himself of all the things that God did in his life. And he reminded himself because of how God had worked in his life in his past and all the things that God had given him, that Paul's in jail, but there's people that care for him and they want to help him still. And that was God showing Paul, I haven't forgotten about you. That I remember when I was in college and seminary, I had a nickname, and I was called Eeyore. And yeah, the donkey from Winnie the Pooh. He doesn't have pants, but anyways, so about that, this is why. Because when I got angry and when I got upset, when I was happy, I was happy. But when I was down, I was completely down. And no one could speak me out of it. And I would be miserable for days. And it got to one point that one good friend of mine, he said, dude, are you ever thankful? And I remember I was in college. I didn't get to college until I was 21. And I remember being at Liberty and having this incredible blessing that I get to be in college and I get to study ministry. And whenever I got sad, I forgot everything God had did for me. And maybe that's you sometimes, that you forget everything that God has done for you and you just stay sad. It's okay to be sad and frustrated, but the way you're going to battle that is with thankfulness to God. Why? He says thankfulness, it guards your heart and it brings God's peace to you. That many of you, you know this story already, that it was Jesus and the 10 lepers. And, okay, when I was a little kid, I thought it was like Jesus and the 10 leopards. And it always confused me because I thought Jesus was like playing with big cats, and that makes no sense. Why? Because leopards don't live in Israel, so it didn't make sense to me. But moving on from that, I realized now that it was leopards. That's what a Bible college education does for you. It corrects your thinking on Bible stories that were always there. But anyway, so Jesus in the story of the 10 lepers, that these guys had leprosy, and many of you, maybe you know what this disease was, that it would kill your nervous system so that you couldn't feel. So if your hand was on fire, you wouldn't feel it, or if you had a cut, you wouldn't feel it. So infection would get into your body, and your body parts would start falling off. And eventually, because it was such a contagious disease, if you had leprosy, you were given a bell in Israel, and you would have to walk around, and people would hear the bell, and you would have to say, unclean, 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 so people would stay away from you, and you had to live a life in isolation by yourself. And it was a hard life, and it was a hard death for those people. So they see Jesus, and they are saying, Jesus, have mercy on us. Jesus, heal us. So Jesus heals the 10 lepers, and what do? They're so happy. They're so caught up in what Jesus did. They all take off running because they're so happy what Jesus did. But yet one turns around, and he goes back, and he says, thank you. And Jesus is like this. Didn't I heal 10? Where are the 9? And that's us, right? When Jesus does good things in our life, we get so caught up in that good thing that we forget to be thankful, and eventually we become like this. This is what we think God has done in our life. Nothing. And we forget every good thing God has ever done. So when the next bad thing happens, we are like this blank note card, and we have nowhere to go. We have 0 things to be thankful for because we live our life as if God has done nothing for us. So when you hit that bad situation, and if you feel like God has done nothing for you, how do you trust him? You can't. You don't. But thankfulness, having a heart that reminds you of what God has done in your life, it helps you get through those dark times that eventually will come your way. Which brings me to this point. A lack of thankfulness creates distance between you and Jesus. A lack of thankfulness creates distance between you and Jesus. That this story in Luke chapter 7, this guy named Simon, who was a Pharisee, he invited Jesus over to his house for this party. And while Jesus is at this party in this guy's house, this woman who was a sinner, that she was a loose woman, she had this reputation in town, she finds out Jesus is at this guy's house. So she goes to the house, and while she's at the house, she throws herself upon Jesus' feet, and she takes this perfume and she starts pouring it on Jesus' feet. And this guy named Simon, he thinks, dude, what is going on here? This is incredibly weird. And Jesus says this to him. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. Another way to put this verse is this. He who is thankful for little loves Jesus little. The person who is thankful for much loves Jesus much. And this idea I want to get to you is this. Simon could have said this, dude, you said I didn't do any of these things for you. You're in my house. Is that enough? I invited you into my house, Jesus. And what Jesus is getting at, because that whole idea of pouring ointment on his feet, the whole idea of getting waters for his feet, that you didn't have to do that for a guest, that was going over and beyond. For some of you, let me ask you this question, and think about this. Are you happy that Jesus is just in your heart? Are you happy that Jesus is just in your heart? And for many of you, I'll put it this way. Are you happy Jesus is just in your home? Or is he an honored guest? And that's the question I want to leave you with. Are you satisfied that Jesus is just in your home? Or is he an honored guest in your home? So something we're going to do, I'm going to ask the guys who have the note cards to take those and pass those out. And while they're doing that, once again, this whole idea of this note card, I want you to be close to Jesus. As a pastor, that's my end game. I want you to know Jesus better because of the things that we do. And while you have this note card and this pen, take some time to really think about what are you really thankful for that Jesus has given you in your life? What are you really thankful for what Jesus has given you in your life? And maybe this is helping you just remind yourself how much Jesus really does care for you. So while that's happening, do that and just fill out the card.
What fortune lies beyond the stars? Where
All right, so what we're gonna do now, we're gonna ask you to get in groups 6 to 8, like we would do our prayer groups. So leave your chairs where they are, and what we want you to do is to, share what are you thankful for, and it doesn't have to be the most personal thing on your card, but get in groups 6 to 8, share what you are thankful for, and then just talk to God about it. Because so often we bring our requests to God, but we forget just to tell Him what we're thankful for. And that brings us closer to God, that we want you to be close to each other because you need the people in this room to do the Christian life. And you need to be close to each other, and you need to be close to God. And the best friendships are the friendships that are centered around Jesus. So you guys go do that, get in your groups 6 to 8, and you'll just share what's on your card and pray. And pray specifically about what you're thankful for, your thankfulness to God.